My name is Ellie. I'm 33 years old and live in a quiet little town in Vermont. The white wooden house where my father and I used to live sits tucked on a hillside, blazing red leaves in the fall and thick layers of snow covering the roof like frosting in the winter. My father passed away 3 weeks ago, after nearly a year battling pancreatic cancer. I still remember that morning, before the sun rose over the distant mountains, when he quietly passed in his sleep. I haven't gotten used to the emptiness. Every morning, I still walk downstairs as if he were sitting in the living room, reading the paper and sipping coffee like always. Every time I pass his old armchair, my heart tightens. I took care of him during his illness. From the moment we got the diagnosis, I cut back at the town library and moved in with him, driving him to appointments, cooking, managing medications, and helping him sleep. Savannah, my younger sister, was completely absent. She lives in New York, works in public relations. When Dad began treatment, I called, texted, emailed, even wrote her a letter. But Savannah always claimed her schedule was packed, her job too demanding, and that she couldn't make a trip home. Once, she even said to me over the phone, irritated, "You know I don't do well with all that small-town sadness." I stayed silent. I was afraid if I spoke, I'd say something I couldn't take back. Savannah and I used to be close, but since she left for college, something slowly shifted between us. I stayed in town, lived simply, remained close to our parents. She, on the other hand, flew off like a freed bird into the city, chasing lights and endless parties. On the day of Dad's funeral, Savannah arrived almost an hour late. She stepped out of a rented SUV wearing a black designer dress and oversized sunglasses that covered half her face. I barely recognized her. She walked into the funeral home without saying a word. No hug for Mom, not even a glance toward me. It wasn't until the pastor started speaking that she finally sat in the front row, settling in like a distant guest of the deceased. 3 days after the funeral, Mom called us into the living room. She said, "Your father left a will." Savannah let out a dry laugh. Of course he did. I turned to Mom. She handed me a thin, yellowed folder and said the family lawyer would be here the next morning. That night, I sat alone in the living room, staring out the big window. Snow had begun falling lightly outside, dusting rooftops across the town. I suddenly remembered something Dad once told me early on during his treatment. "When I'm gone, look for what I left behind." It's not in the will. At the time, I assumed he meant memories. But that night, the words kept me awake. The next morning, Mr. Peterson, our longtime family lawyer, arrived right on time, carrying a glossy black briefcase. We gathered around the dining table as Mom poured everyone tea. The air was tense but quiet. Mr. Peterson opened the case, pulled out a copy of the will, and began reading, "The house and all property in this area will be transferred to his wife, Mrs. Ruth Harper." Savannah raised her eyebrows, smirking with satisfaction. I felt like I'd been slapped. "Lastly," Mr. Peterson continued, "the remaining property, the small back house and the rear lot, will go to Ms. Ellie Harper." Savannah giggled. "The back house? You mean that old wooden shack behind the stable? How touching." I said nothing, but my chest tightened. I didn't care about the money. But why had Dad left Savannah all of it, and left me with just an old cottage he used as a garden retreat? When Mr. Peterson closed the file, my mother looked at me for a long moment. Her gaze said something I couldn't fully grasp, as if it carried a message left unsaid. That evening, she handed me an old iron key and softly said, "Go, alone." I held the key in my palm, a mix of doubt and curiosity swirling inside me. The back house, what Dad jokingly called the hermit hut, had always been neglected. It was small, old, covered in dry leaves and moss, and one side had been struck by lightning a few years ago. Yet now, it was all I had. Savannah, on the other hand, practically jumped when she heard the words $120,000. She even turned to me with a half-pitying, half-triumphant look and said coldly, "Well, at least you've got a roof when the snowstorms hit." I pressed my lips together, not because of the shack, but because of the cruelty in the voice of the sister I used to love. I had spent the past year beside our father, managing every pill, every meal, every chemo session. Savannah called maybe a few times, sent flowers on Thanksgiving, then carried on with her dazzling city life. That afternoon, after seeing Mr. Peterson out, I pulled the key from my coat pocket and walked to the backyard alone. The snow had just melted, leaving the ground wet and slick beneath my boots. The back house sat nestled behind tall pines, silent like a forgotten memory. The peeling wooden door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside was pitch black, with only faint light through the window cracks. Dust coated everything, and faded cloths covered the furniture. I turned on my phone flashlight, an old wooden table, folded maps, a small bookshelf with worn paperbacks Dad once read. I was about to leave when the beam of light caught a photo above the fireplace. It was me and Dad, on the steps of this cottage the day I graduated high school, both holding hot cocoa, smiling wide. I reached out and touched the frame, throat tight. Behind the fireplace was a small rug. Something felt off. I knelt and found it held down by two misaligned bricks. Carefully lifting it, I uncovered a metal trapdoor with a handle. My heart pounded. I never knew this place had a basement. The iron key trembled in my hand as I fitted into the lock. Click. A deep, solid sound, like a secret answering back. I opened the hatch. Cold air and damp wood smell rushed up. A narrow wooden staircase led down. I hesitated, then descended. The basement was small, with low ceilings and paneled walls. A desk stood against one side, holding a black metal box and some notebooks. On the lid was a handwritten note. "Ellie, open when you're ready." I exhaled and opened the box with trembling hands. Inside wasn't cash, but a thick stack of documents, neatly clipped. On top was a yellow envelope labeled, "Investment account for Ellie only." I flipped through the papers. Dad had opened an investment fund over 10 years ago, in my name, and contributed small amounts every year. The current balance left me speechless, over $500,000. I collapsed into the corner chair, tears streaming down. Not because of the money, but because of the quiet, unwavering love behind it. A love that didn't need to be declared in a will. I understood now. Dad hadn't left me with just an old shack. He left me a legacy, a message, a lesson in faith and quiet strength, and I was just beginning to unlock it. I stepped out of the basement, heart still pounding. The cold outside couldn't shake me from what I'd just discovered. Over $500,000, an unimaginable sum for a small-town librarian like me. But more powerful was the way Dad had given it, discreetly, gently, as if he knew I'd never ask, never fight, and so he protected me in his own way. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the bedroom window, looking out at the back house now cloaked in darkness. I remembered Dad's words. "The most precious things, Ellie, aren't always in plain sight." I'd laughed then, thinking he meant a rare book. Now I knew. He meant life itself. The next morning, I returned to the back house. Something still pulled at me, as if the hidden basement wasn't the only thing he'd left behind. I cleaned every dusty item, checked each drawer, each wall corner. Then, standing before the back brick wall, I noticed something strange. A thin, almost invisible gap running along the base, only visible if you knelt to the floor. I used an old paring knife to gently pry at the gap, and the entire section of wall swung open like a door. Behind it was a narrow, pitch-dark space, just wide enough for one person to slip inside. My heart was racing again, but I stepped in, flashlight in hand. The space was smaller than I expected, with rough wooden walls and no windows. In the corner stood a moss-green safe, old, heavy, and coated in dust. I recognized it almost instantly, It used to sit in Dad's office, back when he ran his small construction company in town. I remembered it clearly, because as a child, I would sneak into his office after school, spin around in his leather chair, and play with everything on his desk. When I once asked what he kept in the safe, he just smiled and said, "A grown-up secret. Maybe one day you'll know." Now I was grown, and the safe was right in front of me. I rushed back down to the basement where I had found the document box. Inside were two small keys I hadn't figured out yet. I brought them both to the hidden room. The first didn't fit, but the second slid into the lock and gave a soft, strange click. I held my breath and turned the handle. The safe door opened slowly, revealing neatly arranged black velvet boxes, each labeled with Dad's familiar handwriting. I carefully opened each one. Inside were watches. Not just ordinary ones, but rare, vintage, and so exquisitely crafted that I was left breathless. There was a limited edition Rolex from the 1960s. A Patek Philippe I'd read about in a finance article once, valued in the hundreds of thousands. An entire collection, which I would later learn Dad had quietly built over more than 20 years. Each watch had been bought during business trips, each one holding a memory, a story. At the back of the safe was an envelope containing certificates and appraisals from a specialist in Boston. The total estimated value? Nearly $520,000. I sank to the wooden floor, eyes stinging. Dad had been preparing all of this for a long time, not just financially, but as a way to protect me, a message of quiet trust that I would know how to handle what he left behind. But I also knew this much: with a value like that, I couldn't just keep it all a secret. I needed guidance, and more importantly, I needed to honor the trust my father had sealed inside those silent velvet boxes. I spent nearly a week trying to calm my nerves. Each time I opened the safe and saw those watches shimmering under the flashlight, it felt like I was in some strange dream that could vanish if I blinked. But it was real. Every watch, every appraisal, every handwritten note from Dad. I knew that if I stayed quiet, no one would ever find out. But I also knew this kind of asset couldn't just sit untouched. I didn't want to live with fear or secrecy. If Dad trusted me enough to prepare all of this, then I had to handle it right, with integrity, transparency, and care. I called Mr. Peterson and told him everything. He listened silently, then said gently, "Ellie, your father was extremely meticulous. Those watches weren't titled under any name, but if kept in a safe considered part of the estate, they would technically be part of the inheritance. He advised I hire a licensed accountant to assess and properly declare everything, to avoid future complications." A few days later, I was referred to Clara Jensen, a tax accountant based in Montpelier. From our very first meeting, I could tell she was professional and kind. Clara came to my house on a Friday morning with her laptop, documents, and a handheld scanner. Together, we opened the safe and went through each item. As she carefully slipped on gloves, she exclaimed, "This is an exceptional collection, Ellie. Some of these, if auctioned properly, could go far beyond the listed value." I sat beside her, opening each velvet box, telling her what I remembered about Dad. How he wore the gold Longines at my graduation. Or how he once hid a pocket watch in my lunchbox to surprise me. After 3 hours of careful work, Clara concluded, "The current estimated value is around $523,000. You'll need to pay inheritance tax based on that. However, payments can be arranged, gradually, or deducted from any sales proceeds." I nodded. "I don't plan to keep them all. I'll choose a few that hold memories. The rest, I think they deserve to go to people who truly appreciate their worth." In the weeks that followed, with Clara's help, I sold 11 valuable watches at a reputable auction house in Boston. After taxes and fees, the total amount I received was nearly $340,000. Most of it went toward covering the inheritance taxes. The remainder, I set aside to give small gifts to the people who had supported my father during his illness. Dr. Wells, Nurse June, and Mr. Tom, the retired neighbor who shoveled our driveway when I was away. I sent simple gifts: a gift card, a handwritten thank you note, and a small photo of me and Dad from the past. I didn't want anyone to think I was showing off. I just believe gratitude should be spoken and, when possible, shown. As for me, I kept 3 watches: the silver pocket watch Dad wore on special holidays, a vintage Bulova my mom once gave him, and a simple Hamilton he handed me when I started at the library. "So you'll always be on time. And remember, time is precious," he said when placing it in my hand. Everything seemed to settle down. I went back to work at the library, started fixing up the main house so Mom could move in. Life slowly returned to its rhythm. Until one late afternoon in mid-February, as the snow began to melt and the sky turned a pale shade of gray, I heard a car pull up out front. Through the window, I saw Savannah stepping out of a sleek black sedan, holding a designer purse, heels sinking into the damp ground. She stood still for a long moment, then looked directly at the window where I stood. Her eyes. They weren't smug like on the day of the will reading, nor proud like usual. They were empty, tired, and maybe even desperate. I stepped away from the window, my chest heavy. Part of me wanted to walk away, but another part urged me to open the door. Savannah stood on my porch, her wavy brown hair tousled by the wind, high heels muddy, and that hollow look in her eyes made me freeze in the doorway. I opened the door and silently faced my sister. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "How have you been?" she asked, voice weightless, as if drained of emotion. I nodded. "Do you want to come in?" Savannah stepped inside, removed her wet shoes, and sat down like she didn't have the strength to maintain her usual polished act. I poured her a cup of hot tea, my mind swirling with unanswered questions. "I heard you sent gift cards to the people who helped Dad," Savannah began, eyes fixed on her cup. "A doctor, a nurse, even Mr. Tom next door. You had money to do that?" I blinked. "It was just a gesture of thanks." "Hmm?" Savannah nodded, then looked up and stared straight at me. "But where did you get the money?" I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew any explanation would lead to a truth she couldn't handle. "Do you think I won the lottery?" I asked, half joking, half testing. Savannah laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. At first, no. But then I ran into Aunt Nora at that party. She said you gave her a $500 gift card. She said, "Ellie's so thoughtful, even after your dad passed. But I know you were never the type to have money lying around." I said nothing, turning to the window. Outside, the gray sky hinted at another snowstorm. Savannah kept talking, her voice rising. "Then I remembered. The way you went quiet during the will. The way you kept sneaking around that back house like you were hiding something. And then I remembered Dad's old office safe. I started wondering, is there something in that house that I don't know about?" I turned to her. "Savannah, what I received isn't what you think. You're not a good liar, Ellie," she cut in. "And that makes me even more certain." I was about to speak when Savannah suddenly stood, grabbed her coat, and said sharply, "I just want to know. If I sold off my presents during Dad's final year, the least I deserve is to know what I missed." What I didn't know was that after leaving my house that night, Savannah drove straight to Mom's. Mom called me close to midnight. Her voice trembled through the phone. "Ellie, someone broke in. I thought it was a burglar, but it was Savannah." I shot up from bed, heart pounding. "What did she do?" "I'm not sure. I heard noises in the basement. Then I saw her run upstairs with a flashlight in her hand. I asked her what was going on, but she wouldn't say a word. Then she left." I drove to my mother's house immediately, still not fully understanding what had happened. But when I arrived, the basement door was wide open. The floor was a mess. Some cardboard boxes were ripped apart, but the safe was untouched. I looked around and spotted a muddy shoe print on the wooden floor, the exact style of shoes Savannah was wearing when she visited me that afternoon. The chill I felt didn't come from the snow outside. It came from a truth I didn't want to admit. Savannah had tried to take what wasn't hers, and she likely wasn't done. I got a call from Mom on a Sunday morning while I was making coffee in the kitchen. Her voice was panicked, broken. "Ellie, go to the hospital." "Savannah, she had an accident. The safe, it fell on her." I froze. The coffee cup slipped from my hand and shattered on the tile floor. 15 minutes later, I was in the emergency room of the regional hospital. Mom was sitting in the waiting area, pale, clutching the old knit scarf she always carried. When she saw me, she rushed over, eyes red. "She came to the house last night. Alone. I thought she was just looking for a few keepsakes. I had no idea she went down to the basement." I gripped the strap of my bag, heart racing. "How did the safe fall? It's heavy. I think she tried to open it. Maybe forced it, pulled or tilted it, then lost balance." Mom choked up. When I heard that loud crash and her screaming, I thought my heart stopped. About an hour later, the doctor came out and said Savannah had a broken right leg, soft tissue injuries in her lower back, and would need to stay in the hospital for at least a few weeks. I stepped into her room. She lay there with her leg in a cast, staring blankly at the ceiling. There was no sign of regret. "What are you doing here?" she asked dryly. "I'm not really sure," I replied honestly, standing a few feet from the bed. "Don't look at me like you've never kept secrets," Savannah said, scoffing. "I know what's in the safe. Don't think I'm stupid." I stayed silent. She continued, exhausted. "You're not the only one who's had it rough. My life hasn't been easy either, Ellie." I didn't answer. I couldn't argue with someone lying in a hospital bed, wounded both physically and emotionally. What she did was wrong, but I wasn't heartless enough to walk away completely. As I was about to leave, a man in a dark suit walked in. I recognized him immediately. Ryan, Savannah's husband. He didn't even look at me. He walked straight to her bedside, placed a stack of papers on the nightstand, and said firmly, "I brought the divorce papers. Sign them." Savannah froze. "What? You think I don't know you blew through your inheritance, paying off credit cards, buying designer bags, hiring a personal stylist?" Ryan said, calm and cold. "I stayed quiet long enough, but breaking into your mother's house looking for more money? That's it." Savannah gasped, then yelled, "I just wanted what's mine. I'm his daughter too." Ryan looked at her, eyes devoid of any warmth. "Your father gave you your share, $100,000. And you burned through it in less than a year on things that meant nothing. Don't blame others for your own choices." He turned to me and nodded. "I'm sorry, Ellie. You didn't deserve to be dragged into this." After he left, Savannah threw her pillow to the floor in frustration. "He doesn't understand, and neither do you." I picked up the pillow and put it back. "No, Savannah. You're the one who refuses to understand." She turned away, tears falling silently. On the table beside her bed, next to the unsigned divorce papers, was a part-time job magazine. The cover read in bold, "Start over. It's not too late." I walked out, heart heavy. I didn't know if Savannah had the courage to change, but I knew this time she had no one left to lean on. And maybe that's the only way my sister would learn to grow, through the collapse of everything she thought she could control. A few weeks after Savannah was discharged, spring arrived in our little town. The last patches of snow melted off the wooden porch, making way for the first rays of sunlight streaming through the window. Mom and I slowly settled back into our routine, fixing up the main house, rearranging the backyard the way Dad used to every year. But this time, I did it with a completely different mindset. I gently folded Dad's old scarves, tucked them into a cedar chest, then sank to the floor, my hand resting instinctively on my belly. Yes, I was pregnant. I found out 2 days after I left the hospital where Savannah stayed. At first, it was mild morning nausea, then unusual fatigue. I thought it was just stress, until that test showed 2 red lines. I cried. Not out of fear, but from shock. From emotion, from the realization that a new life was forming, just when I thought I had lost all sense of family. When I told Mom, she held me for a long time. Her hands trembled, but her eyes lit up with pure joy. "Your father, he would have been so happy," she whispered. "He always dreamed of holding a grandchild." I nodded, swallowing my emotions. Even thinking about it was enough to make me cry again. I decided to move in with Mom for good, not just because she needed me, but because I needed her too. Her support, her wisdom, and her calm strength would help me through motherhood. I took a leave from the library and poured everything into preparing our home for a new beginning I had never expected. As I started building a family, Savannah went the opposite direction. She moved into a small rental near the industrial zone on the west side of town. After signing the divorce papers, Ryan cut off her credit cards, car, and all financial support. For the first time in her life, Savannah had to apply for a job, wake up early, and work part-time at a hardware store just to pay rent. Mom visited her a few times. She was still Mom, forgiving, soft-hearted, always leaving room for those who hurt her. I didn't go. Not out of anger, but because I needed space. I needed Savannah to face the very life she once looked down on. Simple, quiet, but rich in meaning. One day, Savannah came to my house. Unannounced. She stood outside, holding a small cardboard box. When I opened the door, she was silent for a moment, then handed it to me. "These were Dad's. I found them in an old document bag at my apartment with Ryan. I thought you should have them." I took the box and opened it. Inside were some old photos and a few handwritten notes from Dad, including one unopened letter addressed to me. "Allie, if you're reading this, then I'm probably no longer around. But I believe in you, the way you've always pushed through hard times. I left you the back house, not because it's the smallest, but because it holds the biggest thing. My trust." I folded the letter, looked up at Savannah. Her head was lowered, eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Not for the safe, but for all the years I missed. With you, with Dad, with everything that really mattered." I didn't speak, but I nodded. Forgiveness isn't a word. It's the absence of resentment. She turned and walked back toward the windy road, while I stepped back inside, hand resting gently over my growing belly. Behind me, an old chapter had closed. A chapter of loss, envy, and painful lessons. Ahead of me was a new one, where I wouldn't be alone, where I would become a mother, and where I hoped my child would grow up in a home filled with love, truth, and forgiveness. I couldn't bring Dad back to hear he was going to be a grandpa, but I believed wherever he was watching and smiling. My story is a journey from loss to renewal. From an old garden shed, I didn't just find material inheritance. I rediscovered trust, gratitude, and the meaning of family. While my sister lost everything to greed, I found the true value of unconditional love. Now, as I prepare to welcome a new life, I understand that beginnings often grow from the simplest places, and sometimes from where we least expect. And what do you think about Ellie's choices and Savannah's downfall? Who do you believe truly inherited the most? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt and surprising family stories to come.